Still on the topic of framework-based versus framework-neutral approaches, we had this quote by Johanna Nichols earlier. I suggest that what we call typology is simply framework-neutral analysis and theory. She's making a point that she actually can't understand the formal linguistic literature. So when we say formal linguistics, we normally use this term to refer to syntactic theories or specific syntactic frameworks. So she cannot understand the formal linguistic literature, that is literature written in a particular syntactic framework. This is something to take in. Johanna Nichols is an incredibly eminent scholar. She's really on the top of the list of linguists who have worked cross-linguistically. She's extremely, well-versed and has created, has discovered theoretically very important things, and you will come across her in our reading list again. So here's a linguist who is really not a beginner, saying, I can't understand some of the literature. So the criticism is here that these formalisms, I showed you some of the types of trees we would be dealing with, that these formalization, the way of formalizing this stuff and using very specific terminology makes it actually very hard to read, not just for lay people, but for a well-trained professional linguist who's not working in that particular framework. So that's a pretty harsh criticism, but it's one that's shared actually by many people in the field. And then so jungle linguists like Nichols, so people of the jungle camp who are more interested in diversity and in exploring linguistic variation and so on. So jungle linguists like Nichols, or also Matthew Dreyer, who she's quoting, criticize formal syntactic theories also as transient. And what's meant here is that they do change over time and they don't last. So people who have worked in a particular theory, let's say a Chomskyan theory of how language works and how do we depict syntax and what rules can describe what's happening in the language of the world, grammatical rules. These theories tend to be superseded by, a new book, that the head of the theory, like, for example, Chomsky, where a new approach is described, and whatever happened in the previous version of that theory is kind of superseded. And then terminology changes, so people who now work in certain formal theories do not use the terminology that was used way back. Now, why am I telling you this? This is part of an important part of the history of linguistics, a very recent history, but that also explains to you why I'm talking about two camps. So this idea of the jungle camp and the Martian camp. So most modern formal theories, and formal, as I said, is a way to describe syntactic theories of the Martian camp, who basically assume that all languages share the same structure underlyingly in some sense. All of these modern theories are more or less directly rooted in Chomsky's early work. And they're either rooted in the sense, in Chomsky in the sense that they develop Chomsky's ideas further and run with it and flesh them out and agree with Chomsky. Or there are also some syntactic theories that were developed by people saying, yes, we're really interested in this idea. What is the basis of structure that might be shared across human languages? But we think Chomsky's approach is crap, has many flaws, has some of the wrong assumptions. We're doing it differently. But we're doing it differently is still informed by and based on Chomsky, if you see what I mean. So Chomsky's early idea of generative grammar, and there are many different terms and labels associated with his theory, was incredibly important and influential, and still is. Now, why bother with these formalisms? The trees I showed you, and the terminology that other people in the field say, sorry, I frankly can't read this kind of literature. I don't understand it, without having special training in that theory. Why bother with that? That's the kind of area of linguistics that some people describe as, and often dismissively as, that's word maths. That's kind of, it's very formal, it's very abstract. Why bother with this? Well, there is actually a really important idea in there. So what these theories assume, not all of them, but all of them who are directly based on Chomsky and working with the Chomsky idea, what all of them assume is there is some kind of innateness of language capacity. I keep gesturing to my head when I talk about this. So the idea is in there somehow, hardwired, is our ability to learn language and to speak and to become fully fledged speakers of our native language. Some piece of hardware in our brain allows us to do that. And the hardware, the idea is including knowledge of syntactic rules, something maybe to do with word order or to do with constituents and how they work. So the kind of stuff we're interested in this course and we're looking at. So the idea is there is some kind of universal grammar innate in us as babies, and we need to find out what that is, and that will be the essence of the structure of all human languages. So what these theories are trying to do is to distill what this might be. What might be the innate features of language. Great, interesting idea. This is how this whole area of syntax and morphology and grammar is really closely linked to the study of language acquisition, so how babies learn language, and psycholinguistics. Just like this area that we're looking at, psycholinguistics and language acquisition is a bit of a battlefield between, again, the jungle camp, which is the camp that looks at linguistic diversity and how different languages work, and the Martian camp, the idea that there is essentially one linguistic structure underlying all languages of the world. So it's very interesting to get this connection. So this is why I'm telling you about this. It places the kind of stuff we're doing in this unit in the broader context of the linguistics discipline. Now, I want to look at two concepts, and they're called competence versus performance, or linguistic competence versus linguistic performance. There is an important French scholar, Ferdinand de Saussure, who formulated this distinction between competence and performance, and he talked about langue, or the language capacity, on the one hand, and when we say language capacity, let me disappear here. Language capacity is the perfect rule system of a language that as native speakers we have in our heads. So our language capacity, or the notion of langue, and that's also what we mean by competence, is perfect. Your native speaker knowledge of the language you're speaking is perfect. And so it's referring to language capacity we have in our minds. And, the example I have here, John believed, Mary to hold the opinion that Paul thought. So you can do these endless embeddings, and everything is perfectly grammatically correct and thought out and there. Now, language capacity, the competence is only ever in our head. So I keep gesturing here, but you're missing it. It's only in our heads. It's as soon as we open our mouths, what comes out is not our language capacity, but our performance of it, our actual instantiations of using language. And now I have to disappear again because it's getting a bit crowded in a second. And that Saussure calls parole. So we have the pairs here: competence versus performance, langue versus parole, and language capacity versus language production. It kind of all refers to the same thing. So langue is what we have in our head, our knowledge, while parole is when we actually speak. So our performance, our language production is never as perfect as the knowledge we have. If you ask a native speaker, is this correct? You say, yeah, sounds right. But, so me disappearing again here because we need some space. So parole is the garbled stuff. Or maybe I'm coming in again. Kind of, I was like my auntie, the one I mentioned earlier. Oh no, I didn't. And she said, it ain't my cake. And, so we have lots of pause fillers and hesitations, and I'm starting a relative clause and I'm abandoning the relative clause. Half of what I just said probably wasn't grammatical in the strict sense. So what I'm trying to do with these two pictures is a couple of things. Competence, language capacity is always just what we think. So that's why this is a thought bubble. This is not a speech bubble. This is a thought bubble, and we kind of have depicted the brain here and what it does and thinks about language. While here, this is my reversed blah, blah, blah. So this is something that's actually spoken, has lots of fillers and pauses and non-grammatical, non-quite finished stuff. So this is an important distinction in linguistics. Performance is never perfect, while competence always is. So it's a bit like these two guys. Now, I hope we are still all on the same page in terms of our popular culture, at least to some extent. I hope we do overlap, at least at Superman. I probably don't know half of the memes you're all into. But, so, Superman and Clark Kent. They're kind of the same person, right? But Superman has superpowers and does everything right. He is handsome, he can fly, he has a cape, and he's wearing leggings because he can afford to, because he has great legs, I guess. While Clark Kent, who is actually the human version of Superman, he needs glasses, the poor guy. I assume it's supposed to mean he's less attractive, but very gross Hollywood generalization. So he wears glasses, he's shy, he's not a superhero, he's just doing daily life kind of things, while Superman in his Superman incarnation is really larger than life. So I'm giving you this here as an image, as a metaphor again, that Superman is the competence. Superman is the competence side of language, while Clark Kent is the performance side of language. So, native speaker competence is perfect. Speech production is always messy. Now, going back to our different approaches, the jungle camp and the Martian camp. Remember, the Martian camp comes from our metaphor that Chomsky idea is that if a visiting scientist from Mars came and looked at the languages of the world, they would certainly, according to Chomsky and Pinker and people of that camp, if I can call it that, they would assume that all human languages are actually a single language with different vocabularies. So that's what we've called the Martian camp. While the jungle camp, which I hung on the reading by Evans and Levinson, said, it's a jungle out there. There is variation and diversity in human language all over the place. And it's not superficial variation, which is what the Chomsky and Martian camp claim, but it's real, meaningful, deep-running diversity and differences. Okay, so back to, just so we're back on the same page again of who the Martians are and who the jungle camp is. So syntactic theories a la Chomsky are actually only interested in competence. Why? Because they want to know what's innate in our brains, hardwired somewhere, what allows us to learn the languages we're exposed to as babies. So they're interested in the competence side. So what are the rules in languages? And the rules are actually on the competence side. They're not what we produce, is the idea. So they are actually only interested in language competence. They're not interested in performance. So they are only interested in Superman, but not Clark Kent. So performance, from the point of view of the Martian linguists, so the Chomsky camp, performance is not worth looking at because it's too garbled. It's too full of errors. It's less predictable by rules because we're breaking a lot of rules of grammar as we speak, and actually nobody blinks, right? Because spoken language is like that. And crucially, they think performance is less likely to tell us anything about universal grammar, the kind of innate language capacity that they're searching for, or that the rules of which they're searching for. On the other hand, the most researchers of the jungle camp are interested in both performance and competence. So they are happy to look at competence, Superman, and performance, Clark Kent. So for example, researchers of that corner, if you want, in linguistics, are very interested in discourse patterns of how language works. So not just grammar, but how larger units beyond the sentence behave, how we create larger discourses and patterns, and that can show us how language works. Or they're really interested in what speakers actually say, and not just in what people think they say or what they think they should say. The jungle camp, and that's, people working in linguistic typology, cross-linguist description, language endangerment, all kinds of areas like that. They're very interested in what people actually say and not just what they think they say in their abstract competence. Now in this unit, still contextualizing, we largely work with framework-neutral description and analysis of morphosyntactic phenomena, morphosyntactic grammatical phenomena. So we are interested in what's out there. What are the structures? What are the solutions to different problems that different languages have found or use in terms of making a grammatical system work? So we're looking at linguistic typology and cross-linguistic investigation. So we're largely interested in the approach of what I have termed the jungle camp. So Evans and Levinson, this idea of there is a huge amount of diversity and we need to look at it, we need to describe it. Ideally we should all become field workers and describe linguistic diversity while we can, because we're losing linguistic diversity every day because languages disappear. So people working in this area are often either field workers or working with field workers describing languages, thinking any language that disappears might mean one particular design system of possible human grammar disappears from the world and we can never look at it again. While scientists, linguists on the other side, on the other camp, the Martian camp, the Chomskyan type approach, and I keep using Chomsky as a kind of a hook to hang this from because he's the most eminent person in that field. They would think, well, it might be tragic that a language disappears, but since the general belief there is language structure is essentially the same across languages, it's not a worry for the particular study of what's the possible range of human languages and their structures. Okay, so we are more focused on the kind of investigations of typology and cross-linguistic investigation. We're interested in the question, what are the phenomena and the patterns and the tendencies across human languages in the realm of grammar, of morphosyntax? We'll draw on data from English and many others. Why? Because many phenomena are not found in English, and learning to analyze language without access to native speaker intuition is interesting and important. So, welcome to the jungle.